Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air shift? Not because you were loud or different or defiant, but because you were expected to fail. Not because of anything you said, but because of how you looked. Because your hoodie was zipped high. Because your skin was black. Because your silence made people uncomfortable. That's how Malik Carter walked through school every day. 12 years old, public school piano prodigy, too quiet, too smart, too black to be their kind of talented. So they tried to erase him, not by expelling him, not by fighting him, but by mocking him until he disappeared. They turned off his sound. They laughed at his pause. They called him names that didn't sting out loud, but stuck in screenshots and whispers in the echo chamber of a school that never had space for boys like him. But here's what they didn't know. Malik Carter wasn't built to snap back. He was built to listen, to wait, to play when the world turned down the volume. And when they tried to shut him down, he didn't raise his voice. He wrote a song, a three-part composition, one that spoke louder than fists, stronger than threats, more powerful than any apology offered too late. He called it the setup. And when he finally played it, the world listened. Not because he forced them to, but because truth has a sound. And this time, it wore a hoodie. This is not just a story about music. It's about silence. And what happens when someone dares to break it, not with rage, but with purpose. It's about a boy who didn't need to shout to be heard. He just had to finish a song. And when he did, a whole system had to face what it chose to ignore. This is the story of Malik Carter. This is the sound of resistance without violence, power without volume, and justice, played in C minor. Stay with us, because this story, it doesn't just speak, it plays. The morning bell rang through the cold hallways of Eastbrook Charter School, crisp like the sound of silverware clinking against porcelain. Students filed in like clockwork, white polos ironed flat, hair gelled back, backpacks with logos that cost more than rent in some parts of town. Eastbrook was a polished place, polished and painfully aware of it. Tucked in between the polished shoes and privileged laughter, a shadow moved quietly through the crowd. Malik Carter, 12 years old, 5 foot nothing, skinny as a lamppost, hoodie pulled over his head, gray, faded, slight tear near the cuff, stitched by his grandmother's old sewing machine with purple thread. He didn't walk fast. He didn't drag his feet. He moved like someone used to not being seen, not from fear, but from strategy. He passed a group of boys tossing a football by the lockers. "Yo," one of them barked. "Watch it, Carter." Malik didn't flinch, just kept walking, eyes down. Music playing softly in one earbud, the other tucked behind his hoodie. It was Bach today. Prelude in C. Because mornings at Eastbrook needed something orderly, something that didn't argue, something that reminded him he could still control a part of the world, even if it was just in his ears. As he turned down the B-wing hallway, Ms. Horton, the assistant principal, gave him a glance. A glance, not a greeting. That was fine. Malik wasn't looking for hellos. He was just trying to get to room 214 before the bell, before Ms. Weller started calling out attendance in that voice of hers that sounded like it belonged in a museum tour guide booth. Fake excited and full of historical facts nobody asked for. Room 214 was supposed to be an integrated space for creative excellence. That's how they labeled it in the newsletter. In real life, it was a cold room with an old upright piano in the back and 23 kids, 22 of them white, pretending poetry and jazz went together like peanut butter and caviar. Malik slipped into his usual chair. Back row, 2 seats from the corner. His desk wobbled a little, one leg shorter than the rest. He liked it that way. The unevenness gave him rhythm. The others around him found it annoying. Perfect. He pulled out his notebook, black cover, pages full of song sketches, musical intervals, and the occasional Langston Hughes line rewritten in 6/8 time. The girl next to him, Abigail Blake, gave him a glance. She always looked like she was about to ask him something. She never did, probably because Malik never gave her an opening. He tapped his pencil lightly on the edge of the desk, not out of nervousness, out of timing. 3 beats. Rest. 5 beats. Rest. Repeat. His version of meditation. "All right, everyone," Miss Weller chirped as she glided into the room, her scarf flowing behind her, like she thought she was starring in some Broadway production. "Let's bring those brilliant minds to attention." Nobody clapped. A few mumbled, "Good morning." Most didn't. Malik didn't. He was busy writing a counterpoint to the Langston Hughes stanza she'd assigned yesterday. Not because she asked, but because he heard something in the words. A tension, a musical argument waiting to be scored. Ms. Weller began her usual intro, rambling about how art was resistance and rhythm was revolution. She was the type who threw around words like empowerment while never actually empowering anyone outside her comfort zone. Malik had never once been called on in her class. Not once. He raised his hand once during week 2. She looked at him, blinked, and then called on Trevor, the same Trevor who once said Duke Ellington was probably just a music YouTuber. That's when Malik learned. In rooms like these, silence was safer than being seen. So he stopped raising his hand. He wrote instead, wrote through lectures, through discussions, through the bad takes, through the microaggressions passed off as intellectual curiosity. He wasn't angry. Not really, just practiced. That day, the window next to him was fogged from the rain outside. He wiped a small circle with his sleeve and watched the students outside cross the courtyard. One girl was singing something off-key. A boy in a Letterman jacket was mocking her with exaggerated dance moves. He smiled faintly. Then his pencil tapped again. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Back to the notebook. Because Malik Carter, Black Hoodie, invisible, unnoticed, was writing the soundtrack to a moment nobody else could hear. Not yet, but soon. Lunch at Eastbrook was a ritual in hierarchy. The round tables in the cafeteria weren't assigned, but everyone knew their place. The athletes owned the corner under the skylight. The drama kids took the middle, always loud, always performing. The student council sat closest to the faculty doors, where they could be seen by teachers and whispered into favor. Malik Carter didn't sit at any of those tables. He didn't sit at any table at all. He preferred the space under the bleachers behind the gym, right by the cracked concrete wall where rainwater leaked in thin lines down to the gravel. It was quiet there. Not lonely, just quiet. And Malik didn't mind quiet, because inside the silence, there was sound. He'd pull out his sandwich, half a banana and a pencil stub. And while most kids scrolled TikTok or FaceTime their friends, he filled lines of staff paper with fragments of chords, inverted arpeggios, fragments of a piece he hadn't finished yet. He called it Eastbrook in E minor, because that's what the school sounded like to him. Sharp, calculated, with just enough unresolved tension to keep you from getting too comfortable. At home, things were different. His mom, Charmaine, worked late at the county office doing permits and planning reviews. It paid just enough to keep the lights on and the fridge half full. Malik knew how to make top ramen taste like soul food, knew how to wait until 10 p.m. to ask for help with math, knew how to keep the TV low so his mom could nap before her graveyard shift at the grocery warehouse. But his real compass? Miss Essie, his grandmother, 82, tiny, strong like pine roots, smelled like cocoa butter and old hymnals. She played piano in the community church when her arthritis led her, the one who taught Malik what syncopation was when he was 6, using pots and pans and her old clunker of a keyboard missing the middle D. Essie didn't care about school rankings or what brand of shoes Malik wore. She cared about his posture when he played. She cared about whether he could feel the music before he read it. "You listen with your bones," she told him once. "If you gotta think too hard, you ain't ready to play it." That stuck. Eastbrook didn't know that side of Malik. Didn't know about the jam sessions in the living room after midnight. Didn't know about the tapes of Miles Davis and Thelonious Monk his uncle sent from Chicago. Didn't know that Malik had memorized whole suites just from listening, never reading a note. And he wasn't about to tell them, because Eastbrook was the kind of place where knowledge had to come with paperwork, where talent wasn't real unless it came with validation from someone with a PhD or a building named after them. Malik had neither. He had a hoodie, a pencil, and the kind of discipline no one clapped for. That Thursday afternoon, the sky darkened too early. The storm outside rolled like distant timpani, and inside room 214, Ms. Weller introduced the new unit, Jazz and Justice. She played a scratchy audio clip of Langston Hughes reciting The Weary Blues. The class followed along on printed sheets, half listening, half texting under the desks. But Malik, he closed his eyes. He could feel the swing in the words, the way Hughes let the rhythm hang in the air before snapping back to rhyme. It was a groove, a broken meter that made sense. Who can describe the musicality of this piece? Miss Weller asked, looking over the heads of her favorite students. Anyone? No hand went up, except Malik's. Slow, careful, for the first time in weeks. The room paused. And for a second, so did Miss Weller. Her eyes landed on him like she'd just spotted a deer at the edge of the woods. Curious, but not convinced it belonged. Yes, Carter, she said. Not Malik. Just the last name. Like a misfiled document. Malik kept his voice low, steady. It's written in loose 6/8, ma'am, with some 4/4 blues phrasing mixed in. There's swing in the breath. The way he ends each line, he's not just reading, he's playing. Silence. Even the air vent sounded louder. Ms. Weller blinked. Well, she said slowly, someone's got ears. A few kids chuckled. Malik didn't smile. He knew that tone. It wasn't a compliment. It was curiosity with a leash on it. She walked to the whiteboard, uncapping a red marker. So, Malik, she continued, you clearly have a feel for this. Do you play? He hesitated. The truth was sitting in his notebook. In the margin, he'd written a riff that would have fit the Weary Blues like a glove. But saying yes felt dangerous. Still, he nodded. A little. Ms. Weller smiled, but her eyes were testing him now. Well then, she said, capping the marker, I think we'll have a little performance tomorrow, the class murmured. You'll play something for us, won't you? She added, more a statement than a question. The words dropped like a curtain. Malik didn't answer, but he didn't say no either. That night, Malik Carter didn't touch the piano. Not at first. He sat at the kitchen table, hoodie still on, backpack still zipped, staring at a blank piece of music paper like it owed him something. The little apartment hummed with the soft static of the broken fridge. The hallway light flickered every few seconds, but nobody bothered fixing it anymore. Across the room, Miss Essie hummed low and warm as she diced onions for tomorrow's stew. Her body bent with time but still moved like rhythm lived in her bones. You all right, sugar? She asked without looking up. Malik didn't answer at first. He just traced a whole note on the page, then scribbled it out. Teacher called on me today. Essie chuckled. Well now, alert the press. She wants me to play tomorrow, he said. At that, Essie's hand stopped. She looked over, wiping her fingers on the towel. Play what? Piano, Malik replied. In front of the whole class. Essie raised an eyebrow. Volunteered or voluntold? Malik smirked, then shook his head. She asked like it was a question, but I knew it wasn't. Essie nodded slowly. There was a long silence, but not the kind that makes things awkward, the kind that gives space for truth. You scared? She asked. He didn't respond right away. Then, not of playing. Essie crossed the kitchen, pulled out the chair across from him, and sat down slow. Then what, baby? Malik looked at the paper again. She wants to see if I'm real, he whispered. Essie leaned back, and then she smiled, not wide but deep. Then show her. By midnight, the apartment echoed. Not loud, not chaotic, but full. The keys of the old Yamaha keyboard clacked under Malik's fingers. Cheap plastic, a few sticky from spilled juice years ago. The sustain pedal squeaked when he pressed too hard, but he didn't care, because the music he played wasn't for the class, or for Ms. Weller, or even for Miss Essie, who nodded from the couch, her eyes half closed but her soul listening. It was for himself. He played a piece that didn't have a title yet, a mix of his grandma's Sunday gospel, of Miles Davis on cassette, of the city bus screeching outside his window, of Langston Hughes's Weary Blues wrapped in 6/8 time, and a kid's fingers that moved like they were chasing something invisible. The next morning the rain had stopped, but the clouds hadn't moved. Eastbrook was quieter than usual, as if the building itself was waiting. Malik walked through the halls with his hoodie up, backpack heavier than normal. Not from books, but from the weight of being known. Whispers followed him. Yo, Carter's playing today? No way. That dude doesn't even talk. Think he's actually good? Malik didn't look at anyone. He just kept walking, kept breathing. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. His rhythm, his armor. Room 214 smelled like old paper and dust, same as always. The piano sat in the back corner, untouched, forgotten, until today. Miss Weller stood at the front with her hands folded neatly, smile painted on like theater makeup. Well, class, she chirped as promised, Malik has graciously agreed to share a little music with us. Heads turned. Malik didn't move, until he did. He stood slowly, walked past rows of surprised faces, past the table where Abigail Blake sat wide-eyed, past Trevor's fake yawn, past Ms. Weller's expectant gaze. He sat at the bench. The wood creaked. He adjusted the seat, then rested his fingers on the keys. The room went still, not a sound. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hold its breath. Malik closed his eyes, and he played. What came out wasn't a polished recital piece. It wasn't classical. It wasn't clean. It was real. It started slow, minor chords suspended in air, hovering like fog. Then came syncopation, a rhythm that bounced like basketballs on cracked pavement. Then blues threaded with jazz phrasing and gospel turnaround. A melody that spoke in defiance without saying a word. The class sat stunned. Trevor stopped chewing his gum. Abigail leaned forward. Ms. Weller's smile faltered. And Malik? Malik played like someone who had never been silent. Like the hoodie on his back wasn't a disguise but a flag. Like every ignored hand, every muttered judgment, every time someone asked, "Do you even play?" had been stored up for this moment. He ended with a single note, soft, drawn out, left hanging. Then he stood. No bow, no smile, just silence. The kind that demanded respect, the kind that didn't need applause. Malik didn't wait for applause. He walked back to his seat like nothing happened. Hoodie up, eyes down, notebook in hand, like he hadn't just set fire to every stereotype simmering under the surface of room 214. But the room had changed. You could feel it. The air buzzed differently. Not loud, not obvious, but sharp, like static before a lightning strike. Ms. Weller cleared her throat too quickly. Thank you, Malik. That was certainly unexpected. She tried to smile, but her voice cracked in the middle. And to someone like Malik, someone who listened better than he spoke, that crack was louder than a scream. He'd won the moment, but not the war. At lunch, Malik sat in his usual spot, under the bleachers, sketching out new ideas on the back of a takeout napkin. But this time, he wasn't alone. Yo, a voice said. He looked up. Trevor James, the same kid who once called jazz dead people's music, was standing there with a half smirk and a Gatorade in his hand. That thing you played, Trevor said, was that like made up? Malik shrugged. Kinda. Trevor nodded slowly. Not bad, he said, then walked away like he hadn't just said the most words to Malik all year. Malik went back to his napkin, but now the silence wasn't comfortable. It was pierced, touched, like something had been stirred that wouldn't settle again. He didn't like it. The next few days were a blur of contradictions. Some kids nodded at him in the hallway like he was suddenly visible. One girl from 7th grade asked if he gave lessons. A boy from the soccer team said, "You're that piano dude, right?" Like they were already friends. But beneath the curiosity, Malik could feel something colder brewing. Something from Ms. Weller. She didn't call on him again. Not once. She didn't mention his performance, didn't reference the lesson, didn't even look his way unless it was to collect homework. The piano, now wiped down and tuned by someone on staff, was suddenly locked. No one played it again. Not even her. And that would have been fine if that were all. But it wasn't. The first real shift came the following Monday. It was subtle. The class was discussing poetry and pain, how art is born from suffering. A few students offered shallow answers. Then Ms. Weller said casually, "Malik, as someone who, let's say, channels emotional depth in your playing, how do you relate to this idea?" The room fell quiet. Every head turned. It sounded like a compliment, but Malik heard the weight underneath. "Someone like you." The subtext was loud. "You're black. You must know pain, right? Play it for us. Again. Make us feel something while we dissect you." He replied softly, "I think pain's just a part of the language, not the whole story." She blinked, then smiled tight. "Interesting." And that was the end of it. Except it wasn't. That night, Malik pulled his hoodie over his head tighter than usual. He walked home slower. He didn't touch the piano, didn't even glance at his notebook. It wasn't the attention that bothered him. It was the shift. He didn't trust the applause. He didn't trust the nods in the hallway, because underneath it all was something sour. He'd seen it in his mom's eyes when she came home from work and told him how a client at the permit office had asked if she was the cleaning lady. He'd heard it in his grandma's voice when she said, "They don't mind us being good, long as we stay quiet while doing it." And Malik, he had been quiet until now. Now they knew he had something. Now they wanted to take it from him, piece by piece, with questions disguised as compliments, with attention disguised as acceptance. And somewhere between the school gates and the cracked sidewalk leading to his apartment building, Malik whispered to himself, "They didn't want the music. They wanted the performance." He zipped his hoodie up to his chin, not because it was cold, but because it was time to armor up. By Friday, the murmurs started. They didn't come from Miss Weller. She had gone back to pretending Malik didn't exist, at least on the surface. No, these came from her favorites, from the row of kids who always had front row seats to her praise. Kids with last names that ended up on scholarship plaques, the ones who treated classes like auditions for their parents' approval. It started in the locker hallway. "Yo, that Malik kid's like intense," one voice said. "I heard he doesn't even write music. He just copies stuff. No way." Ms. Weller said his piece was too sophisticated, like suspiciously good. Maybe he downloaded it off YouTube. They didn't say it loud. But they didn't need to, because whispers have sharp edges when they were aimed right. Malik heard them, always had. He moved past the circle of gossip with the same steady walk. Hoodie up, eyes forward, no eye contact, no confrontation. But something in his grip on the notebook tightened that day. He sat in the back of the classroom, watching Ms. Weller pass out a new worksheet. Interpretation and ownership in creative arts. The irony almost made him laugh. He scanned the page. Questions about originality, influence, citing sources. He could feel it. This wasn't just a lesson plan. It was a warning shot, a quiet message between the lines. "You're not supposed to be this good. Prove you didn't steal it." That afternoon, as Malik packed up to leave, Ms. Weller called out, "Malik?" A moment? He froze. Every other student filed out, tossing casual glances back. Some smirked, a few curious, one or two hesitant. Ms. Weller stood by her desk, fingers laced tight, like she was bracing for wind. "I've been reviewing your work," she said. Malik said nothing. She continued, "And I have to admit I'm intrigued. Your improvisation last week showed a depth of understanding well beyond your age. Still no smile, still no warmth." Malik nodded slightly. "Thank you. But," she added, stepping around the desk, "we do need to be sure everything submitted is authentically yours." There it was, the knife behind the compliment. Malik looked her in the eye for the first time that week. "I wrote it," he said, voice even. "I'm sure you believe that," Ms. Weller replied too quickly. "But if you were getting help, say from family or online tutorials, it would be important for academic honesty that you disclose it." The room felt colder somehow, like someone had left a window open that nobody could see. "I don't cheat," Malik said flatly. "I never said you did," she smiled. But the way she said it, she might as well have. At home, the walls of the apartment felt tighter than usual. Malik didn't tell his mom, didn't bring it up to Miss Essie either. What would he even say? That a teacher praised him while planting seeds of doubt in the same breath? That being talented, while black, while wearing a hoodie was somehow a red flag? Instead, he sat at the keyboard and played. Not loud, not fast. Just enough to keep his mind from curling in on itself. Just enough to stay whole. Monday came, and with it, a pop quiz. A listening test. Short melodies piped through old classroom speakers. The kind of quiz Malik could ace with his eyes closed. When it was over, Ms. Weller walked the aisles collecting papers. She paused at his desk. "Do your best?" she asked. Malik gave a single nod. She moved on, but her voice lingered. Too light, too easy, like she already knew the score she wanted to write in red ink. Later that day, he saw Trevor and Abigail whispering near the lockers. He passed them without stopping until he heard it. "Bet he had someone play for him," Abigail said. "It just doesn't make sense. He's never even in clubs." Trevor laughed. "Right? I mean, Hoodie Kid just turns out to be Mozart?" "Please." That one hit deeper than it should have. Malik stopped, just for a breath, then kept walking. But inside, something cracked, because this wasn't about music anymore. It was about permission. Permission to exist with brilliance. Permission to be more than what they imagined he could be. And Malik, he wasn't asking for it. Not then. Not ever. By the end of the second week, Malik Carter had a new title in the hallways of Eastbrook Charter, the Piano Kid. But not in a good way. Not the kind that earns admiration. Not the kind that gets you invited to tables or included in group texts. It was the kind of nickname that drew targets on your back. Quiet, smirking, sarcastic targets. The kind only certain kids knew how to aim, like Dylan Rush. Dylan was tall, athletic, charming when he needed to be, and bored out of his mind in anything that didn't involve being the center of attention. He wasn't the worst kind of bully. He was worse than that. He was the kind that wore fake kindness, like cologne. On Tuesday morning, Malik arrived at his locker to find a crumpled sheet of paper taped to it. Black ink, slanted handwriting, no name. "Play us a song, Hoodie Boy." Or are you only good when the lights are off? It wasn't the words that stung. It was the assumption that what he did was magic, or luck, or fake, that what he was couldn't possibly be real. He pulled the paper off slowly, folded it once, then slid it into his notebook between two pages of chord progressions. A rest note, something to remember. In class, the tension only grew sharper. When Malik answered questions, a few students snickered. When he stayed quiet, they whispered even louder. And when Ms. Weller introduced the next assignment, a solo performance piece with a written reflection, Malik felt the spotlight burning hotter than ever. "You'll each pick a theme," she said, "and compose something original." She looked directly at Malik, too directly. "As always, creativity is welcome, but we'll be paying close attention to authenticity. Plagiarism will not be tolerated." It was dressed in neutral words, but the warning was for him, only him. That night, Malik stared at his keyboard for over an hour. His fingers hovered over the keys, frozen. He wasn't out of ideas. He was out of patience. For the whispers, for the stares, for the feeling of always having to defend what came naturally. He pressed one key, middle C, then another. And slowly, reluctantly, he began to write something. Not pretty, not showy, but honest. He called it "The Hoodie Doesn't Lie." 2 days later, someone slipped a USB drive into Malik's backpack while he was in the bathroom. When he found it, there was a note attached. "Let's see if you can do this without help." "Bet you can't." "No name." "Of course." Malik plugged it into his grandma's laptop at home. There was one file on it, a low-quality piano recording, clearly amateur, stiff tempo, basic melody. He realized what they were doing. They were going to accuse him, set him up, claim he'd stolen this, pretend it was his submission, and then prove it was someone else's. He stared at the screen for a long time, then deleted the file. No need to play by rigged rules. He'd already started his own game. The next morning, Ms. Weller pulled him aside before class. "I'd like to talk to you about your piece," she said softly. Malik raised an eyebrow. "I haven't turned it in yet." She smiled, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Exactly." Then handed him a friendly reminder slip with a bright yellow border. "Academic performance review pending." Malik walked to his desk, sat down slowly, pulled out his notebook, and added a new title to the top of the page. "They Want Me Quiet." Underneath it, he began to write, not just music, but a plan. Because Malik Carter had played their game once. He'd smiled at their praise. He'd endured the side glances, the sugar-coated slurs, the unspoken expectations. But now he understood something deeper. They weren't afraid of his hoodie. They were afraid of what was underneath it. At Eastbrook Charter, nothing was ever random. Even school assemblies came dressed in expectation. Time to the second, with inclusive excellence posters taped to every wall, and parents conveniently invited for photo ops. The March event was called Art and Excellence. Voices of Eastbrook, the kind of title that looked good on newsletters and donor brochures. The email had come 2 weeks earlier. To Malik Carter, from Ms. Weller. "Malik, we've been so inspired by your recent work in class. As such, we'd love for you to share your original piece, The Hoodie Doesn't Lie, at the upcoming assembly. This is a fantastic opportunity for you to demonstrate your talent and represent the power of creative voice at Eastbrook. Looking forward to your participation." "Best, Ms. Weller." He hadn't replied, didn't even want to, but by the time he tried to tell her in person, she waved him off with a practiced grin. "Oh, I've already added your name to the program. You're going to do great, Malik." He could tell. It wasn't a request. The day of the assembly, Malik didn't eat breakfast. He sat in his room, staring at the keyboard in the corner. The plastic keys had started to yellow. A few were chipped, but they played clean. The sustain pedal squeaked on occasion, but he knew how to work around it. The real noise wasn't coming from the keyboard. It was inside him. He wasn't nervous. He was suspicious. It felt too convenient, too perfect. A public stage, a performance he didn't ask for. A moment set up like a spotlight, but with a trapdoor underfoot. Still, he packed up his keyboard in his soft case, slipped on his gray hoodie, zipped it to the chin, and walked out the door like someone preparing for a war no one else saw coming. The auditorium was packed. Rows and rows of students dressed to impress, uniforms clean, hair slicked, whispers bouncing off marble floors like gossip grenades. On stage, the banners read, "Creativity, Courage, Character" in bold navy letters. Malik stood backstage alone, his keyboard on a wheeled cart beside him, earbuds in. Not playing music, just blocking everything else out. Across the curtain, he could hear Principal Langley's voice warming up the crowd. She was good at this. Good at saying words like diversity and equity, like they were flavors on a menu. "And now," she said brightly, "we bring you a truly inspiring voice, a student whose originality and perspective remind us of the beauty and difference. Please welcome Malik Carter." Polite applause. Not loud, not cold, just performative. The kind people gave before deciding what they really thought. Malik stepped out slowly. The lights hit his hoodie like a spotlight on a crime scene. He didn't smile, didn't look around. He rolled his keyboard to the center of the stage, sat down, adjusted the stand, plugged it into the provided power outlet backstage. One breath in, hands to the keys, he began. The piece opened soft, minor sevenths dancing like shadows in late afternoon light. A melody crept in that pulsed like a heart learning how to trust. Notes layered into each other, not polished, but alive. Raw, human. Malik didn't rush. He wasn't performing. He was translating, telling them what it felt like to be watched and doubted, to be praised in the morning and questioned by lunch, to have a hoodie mistaken for a threat and a talent mistaken for theft. The auditorium grew still. You could hear the shift. Even Trevor in the front row had put his phone down. Even Dylan Rush leaned forward. Something real was happening. Then, without warning, the sound cut. Hard, abrupt, total silence. Malik's fingers froze above the keys. He checked the screen. No power. Looked back toward the outlet. The cord was unplugged. Deliberately, his heart slowed, not from panic, but from clarity. This was it. The trap door. A voice near the front muttered just loud enough. "Guest talent needs batteries." Laughter. Scattered at first. Then it grew. Some covered their mouths. Others didn't bother. Someone snorted, should have stuck to SoundCloud. Even Ms. Weller, sitting in the front row, looked up at him with that same frozen smile. Not shocked, just passive, like she'd already decided how this would end. Principal Langley stepped up to the mic with an apologetic face and a cheerful tone. "Well, seems like we've had a little technical hiccup. Thank you, Malik, for your effort. Let's give him a round of applause and move along to our next performer." Another round of polite claps, this time thinner, laced with awkwardness. Malik didn't move, not right away. He stared at the audience, not with anger, not with sadness, with understanding. Then he stood, unplugged his keyboard, rolled it back behind the curtain. The hoodie stayed on the whole time. The applause hadn't even finished before Malik was gone, not just off the stage, out the back of the auditorium, through the side hallway, past the music room, and straight into the courtyard where no one ever went after assemblies. The sky was gray, and the air smelled like wet metal. A storm hadn't started, but it hung above Eastbrook like it was waiting for a reason. He sat on the edge of the concrete planter near the flagpole, hoodie still up, hands in his lap, breathing slow. Behind him, the world kept moving. Students filed out of the auditorium laughing, chatting, shuffling back to class like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just been cut off mid-performance, like his work hadn't been hijacked, like the moment he had created with his music didn't deserve to finish. That was the part they never understood. It wasn't about being interrupted. It was about being dismissed. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Then the door opened and a voice called softly, "Malik?" It was Abigail Blake, of all people. He didn't turn around. She walked slowly, stopping a few feet away. I saw what happened," she said, voice careful, like she was stepping on cracked glass. "That was really messed up." He didn't respond, not right away. Then, "You laughed." Abigail froze. Her lips parted like she might defend herself, but then she closed them. Because it was true. She had. Not because she wanted to hurt him, but because the room had told her it was safe to do so. Because everyone else was. Because Ms. Weller wasn't stopping it. Because the adults had taught the kids when it was okay to laugh at a black boy in a hoodie trying to play Mozart on a plastic keyboard. "I'm sorry," she said finally. Malik didn't nod. Didn't say it was okay. He just stared out across the empty lot. "I didn't ask to be up there," he murmured. "They asked me." "No, they put me there. Like they wanted me to shine. And the second I did, they pulled the plug," she finished for him, literally and figuratively. Later that day, Malik was called to the main office. Principal Langley sat behind her desk, hands folded, a concerned expression printed across her face like a Hallmark apology card. "Malik," she began, "first of all, I want to say thank you. Your performance, what you got through, was very moving. The assembly team was really excited about having your voice included." Malik sat still. She continued, "Now about what happened. It seems there was a misunderstanding backstage. One of our AV student volunteers tripped over the cord. Completely accidental. I spoke to him. He feels terrible." Malik looked up. "Who was it?" Langley blinked. "Oh, I'm not sure you'd know him." "Name?" She shifted in her chair. "I don't think it's productive to assign blame right now. The important thing is, we're looking forward, and we're very proud of you." Malik leaned back. There it was again. Praise as camouflage. When he left the office, Dylan Rush was waiting at the end of the hallway, standing by the water fountain. Arms crossed, backpack slung over one shoulder. That smirk. "Hey, Mozart," Dylan said. "Next time, maybe don't forget to plug in your keyboard." Malik didn't answer. Dylan stepped closer. "You know what's funny? You play one song, and suddenly you think you're a genius. But guess what? This school doesn't belong to you. It tolerates you. That's all." Malik stared at him, not angry, not afraid, just done. With the games, with the whispers, with pretending that being quiet was a shield. He walked past Dylan without a word, because silence wasn't surrender. Not anymore. It was preparation. That night back home, Malik sat at his keyboard again. Miss Essie brought him a cup of peppermint tea and sat nearby, silent, knitting a scarf she'd been working on for weeks. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. After a while, she spoke. "You know what they're scared of?" she said, eyes still on the yarn. "Not your hoodie. Not even your music." Malik looked over. "They scared of your knowing. 'Cause you see 'em clear, and they don't know what to do with that." He didn't say anything, but inside something lit. A chord without a name. A sound waiting to return. The next day at school, something had changed. Not in the curriculum, not in the schedule, but in the air. Students walked a little lighter, like whatever happened yesterday had already faded into myth. A moment everyone saw, but no one wanted to talk about. Not really, not to Malik. He walked through the front doors like he always did, gray hoodie on, headphones in, eyes forward. But every step felt like a spotlight, because even if they weren't saying anything anymore, they were looking. The ones who laughed the loudest, they couldn't meet his eyes now. The ones who stayed silent, they avoided him altogether. And the teachers, Ms. Weller didn't even say good morning when he walked into room 214. She just handed him a worksheet and moved on, like nothing happened, like he hadn't been shoved into the center of the stage, stripped of dignity, and told to smile while they applauded the mistake they made of letting him speak at all. At lunch, Malik skipped the cafeteria. He headed back to the music room, where no one really went anymore. He had a key granted by Ms. Weller months ago, back when she still pretended to encourage him. Now it felt like a relic from a world that never really existed. He slipped inside, closed the door, and sat at the school's upright piano. the same one no one had touched since his first impromptu performance weeks earlier. He lifted the fallboard, ran his fingers across the keys. They were cold, but they still worked. He started to play. Not a performance, not a show, just notes. Real, simple, unapologetic. The sound echoed through the empty room. No eyes, no judgment, no politics, just him and the music. Across the hall, through the glass window, Abigail Blake stood watching. She hadn't said much since the day of the assembly, but she remembered how fast the room turned on him, how none of the adults stopped it, how she sat in the second row and did nothing until he stopped playing. And she realized she'd never really heard him before that moment. That afternoon, a message appeared on Eastbrook's student app board, an anonymous post. Funny how a school can talk about voices and then silence the only one worth listening to. Another followed, then another. By the end of the day, over 30 comments had flooded in, all unsigned. Some were just emoji, some were poetry, some were clumsy attempts at apology. A few even admitted they laughed, because they didn't know how else to react when someone broke the script Eastbrook had written for them. The school tried to delete the posts, but they just kept reappearing. Different names, different words, same truth. Malik hadn't failed. They had. They tried to use him as a symbol and then abandoned him when the message got too real. That night, Principal Langley sent out a school-wide memo. In light of recent miscommunications during the assembly, we are creating a new student-led diversity and arts council. We invite all students to apply. There was no apology, no mention of Malik, no mention of who pulled the plug, just more polished phrases, more bandages on broken bones. But Malik didn't need the council, didn't need the spotlight, didn't need their permission. He sat in his room, hoodie still on, the keyboard glowing softly in the dark. He opened his notebook and turned to a blank page. At the top, he wrote, "They tried to interrupt the music, so I wrote a new song." Then he started to play again. Not for them, for himself. It was the silence that told Malik something was wrong. Not the usual silence, the kind he wore like a shield, but a loaded quiet, sharp and smirking, that hovered over the hallways like a bad smell. It followed him from the front doors of Eastbrook to his locker. No one said anything outright, but he could feel it. The shift, the looks that stayed just a second too long, the stifled chuckles, the heads ducked as he passed, like laughter needed cover. He reached his locker and saw it, a piece of paper taped dead center on the metal door. A low-resolution screenshot, him on stage at the assembly, eyes wide in the moment the keyboard went dead. Someone had drawn cartoon tears in blue Sharpie down his face. Over it, scrawled in red, "Pianist or Pretender." Malik tore it down slowly, folded it once, then slipped it into his hoodie pocket like a receipt for something he never bought. The video had dropped the night before. He hadn't seen it firsthand, didn't need to. Trevor made sure it found him anyway. "Yo, Malik," he said at break, holding up his phone like he was sharing a meme. "You've seen this yet? You're low-key famous." Malik didn't move, didn't speak. Trevor laughed, thumb hovering above the screen. "I mean, come on, you gotta admit, it's kind of funny. The way the keyboard just cuts out and you're just sitting there like..." He mimicked Malik's posture, exaggerated it, dropped his jaw and blinked dumbly. Classic. A few students nearby chuckled. One girl covered her mouth, another pulled out her own phone. Malik walked away, but not fast, not in shame, in calculation, because now he knew what they were doing. The Instagram account was anonymous. No name, no followers, no profile pic. But the video had views, hundreds, then thousands. It looped a 12-second clip. Malik sitting frozen on stage, the audio cutting mid-note, the muffled laughter from the audience. The caption read, When you think you're Beethoven but forget to plug it in hashtag Hoodie Virtuoso, hashtag Eastbrook Elite. It didn't take long for the comment section to pile on. This ain't Juilliard, bro. Dude downloaded his music off YouTube, guaranteed. Why he always got that hoodie like he's hiding from talent. The silence was the best part, TBH. There were memes, edits, sound effects layered over the cutout moment to make it seem even more ridiculous. But worst of all, some of it came from inside the school. Malik recognized the usernames. Abigail's friend, Dylan's older brother, a kid from band class who never spoke to him, but once asked if he rapped because, like, you have rhythm. No one had to say it aloud. They were trying to break him, and they were using the one thing he tried to protect, the music, as the weapon. In room 214, Ms. Weller didn't mention it. Of course not. She didn't ask how he was doing, didn't acknowledge the video or the laughter echoing through the school halls. But during class discussion, she said, casually in her practice teacher tone, "Let's remember, class, that real artists learn to handle both praise and criticism." She didn't look at him when she said it. She didn't have to. The rest of the room did. Malik didn't flinch. He just closed his notebook and stared at the blank page, like it was daring him to say something. Anything. But he'd learned something more valuable than a comeback. He didn't owe them a response. Not yet. At lunch, the jokes kept rolling. Someone slipped a fake award certificate into his backpack, most likely to forget to hit play. Someone else shouted, "Encore," when he walked past the vending machines. Trevor pretended to trip and fall next to him, saying, "Oops, my power cord came loose." And Ms. Weller? She was in the teacher's lounge, sipping coffee, smiling politely at whatever joke was being passed between staff. After school, Malik didn't go straight home. He walked. Nowhere in particular, just through side streets, past the used car lot, under the bypass where graffiti curled like jazz riffs over concrete walls. His hoodie was pulled tight, not to hide, not to disappear, but to contain something rising, something quiet and sharp and growing. That night he sat on the edge of his bed while Miss Essie crocheted in her chair, humming something old and gospel soft. She watched him from the corner of her eye. "You ever gonna let them finish your story for you?" she asked. He didn't answer. So she set down her yarn, stood up, and walked over to him. With one hand, she tugged his hoodie gently. "You wear this like it's armor. But baby, even armor rusts if you don't move in it." He looked up. "I'm not afraid of them," he said. "I know," she replied, "but they need to know that." By Thursday, the joke had evolved. What started as a meme became a campaign. Somebody printed stickers, actual stickers, and started slapping them on lockers, water fountains, even bathroom stalls. Just a simple icon, a tiny piano with a crossed-out power plug beneath it. It was everywhere, and nobody claimed it. Malik found one stuck to the front of his locker. Again. This time someone added the words, "Still silent, huh?" That afternoon, a mock Instagram account appeared. A Hoodie Beats Fail. They'd taken Malik's name and photoshopped him into different scenarios, sitting at a piano underwater, asleep on stage, crying into a keyboard made of waffles. The captions were cruel, juvenile, precise, and they hit. Hundreds of likes, shares, mentions. People outside of Eastbrook started messaging him with laughing emojis. A school indicator remixed the video into a TikTok trend. And still, no one from administration had said a word. Not Ms. Weller, not Langley, not the student advisors. They didn't suspend anyone, didn't launch an investigation. They just watched. Malik walked through it all like a ghost in steel. Every day, hoodie zipped high, eyes locked forward. He didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't sit with anyone, didn't eat. But what no one noticed was what he was doing after school. He started staying late. At first, just 20 minutes, then an hour, then 2. The janitor, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Leonard, led him into the music room without asking questions. Just nodded once and left him be. Malik would sit at the piano in the dim light, alone in the room that once held shame and now held silence. And he would write, not songs, a composition, a full piece, something layered, structured, built to speak. He called it the setup. At home, Miss Essie saw the signs. She didn't ask what he was doing. She didn't need to. She just made sure there was warm tea on his desk when he came home, made sure his keyboard stayed plugged in, and she let him be. One night, as he slipped off his shoes and placed his hoodie on the chair by his bed, she spoke from the hallway. They want you small. Malik paused. She stepped into the doorway. They want to shrink you into a joke, a soundbite, a glitch in their perfect show. But you got more than notes in your fingers, baby. You got thunder. He didn't say a word, but he didn't need to. He felt it too. The next morning, it got worse, way worse. Someone had taken a photo of Malik asleep at his desk, head resting on his arms, hoodie up, face half visible. They edited it, made it look like he was crying, added the caption, when your SoundCloud flops and you remember you still got algebra next period. It was posted from a throwaway Snapchat account and made its way around every 7th and 8th grade homeroom within the hour. Malik found out during third period. Abigail leaned over and whispered, I'm so sorry. I reported it. I swear. He raised one hand, didn't look at her, didn't say a word, just went back to his notes. That afternoon, Ms. Weller pulled him aside. Her face was a careful blend of concern and distance. Malik, she said, we're all aware of the posts going around. And I just want you to know that if you need support, if you're feeling overwhelmed, our counselor, Mrs. Brenner, is available. He looked at her sharp and still, then asked, did you report any of it? She hesitated, blinked, then recovered. Well, unfortunately, it's difficult to trace where it started, and we're still, he turned, walked out, left her standing there. No anger, no shouting, just exit. Because at that point, Malik understood something they hadn't figured out yet. This wasn't bullying. It was a system test, a test of how far they could push him, how far they could strip him down before he either broke or disappeared. And Malik, he was still standing. Friday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of day where even the sun didn't bother showing up. Malik walked into Eastbrook with his hoodie up, headphones in, shoulders steady. The laughter was quieter now, but not gone. Just evolved. Less noise, more glances, less barking, more whispering. That was the thing about hate. It didn't always need to shout. Sometimes it just needed a hallway. As Malik passed the guidance office, he saw Ms. Brenner through the glass, sipping coffee, scrolling her phone. She didn't look up. No one did. Not until he turned the corner. There, taped to the classroom door of room 214, was something new. A poster, printed in full color. It was the now famous screenshot. Malik mid-blink on stage, expression frozen between confusion and focus. But this time, it had been edited further. Someone had photoshopped a dunce cap on his head. In the bottom corner, typed in bold Comic Sans, guest starring at our next assembly, DJ Dead Silence, sponsored by Duracell. The laughter it triggered was muffled, half-covered mouths, shoulders bouncing, phones sneaked out under desks. Inside the room, Ms. Weller just stood at the whiteboard, scribbling musical notations like nothing had happened. Malik walked up, ripped the poster down, folded it into squares with careful precision, then turned, held it up for the class to see, and without a word dropped it into the trash can. The silence was real, thick, hot, embarrassed. But still, no one said a damn thing. That afternoon, as the school emptied for the weekend, Malik didn't go home. He went to the library, not for books, for a printer. He sat at a back table, hoodie down now, fingers flying across the keys of the dusty library computer. He opened his notebook and transcribed the piece he'd been building. The setup for solo piano, 3 movements, inspired by Eastbrook, dedicated to anyone who's ever been turned into content against their will. When the file finished rendering, he printed 2 copies. One he folded, tucked inside the front of his hoodie. The other he slid into a manila envelope addressed to Ms. Weller, from the student you forgot was watching. The following Monday, the school buzzed with something different. Someone had made an announcement over the PA, Principal Langley's voice stiff, almost cracking. All students are reminded that harassment, cyberbullying, and any form of targeted humiliation will not be tolerated at Eastbrook Charter. We take these matters seriously, but nobody believed it, because it was 3 weeks too late, because no one had been punished, because Malik Carter still walked alone, still wore the hoodie, still didn't speak unless he wanted to, until lunch, until the piano room door creaked open, and he was there, sitting behind the same upright piano. And this time, he wasn't playing in secret. He left the door wide open, let the sound drift into the hall, slow at first, minor chords that crept like shadows, then surged upward into clean, bright melodies that demanded attention. Students stopped, turned, peeked in. Some stepped inside. Trevor leaned in the doorframe, arms crossed, lips tight. Abigail stood near the back, hands clasped. Ms. Weller appeared in the doorway too, face unreadable, trying to process what she was hearing, what she'd ignored. Malik didn't stop playing, not for them, not because of them, in spite of them. When he reached the final movement, he shifted into a rhythm that felt familiar, like the echo of his first performance, the one they tried to erase. But this time, there was no power cut, no sabotage, no curtain call, only the music, and the silence that followed when it ended. Not laughter, not applause, just stillness. Respect. He stood, gathered his notebook, nodded once to the room, and walked out, hoodie up, back straight, not to disappear, but because he had things to build. Monday morning came wrapped in fog, not the kind you see, the kind you feel. Malik sat at the tiny kitchen table while the kettle hissed behind him. The sun hadn't fully risen, neither had he. Hoodie zipped up to his neck, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. He stared out the window like the glass might answer the question in his chest. He hadn't spoken much all weekend. Not since the last poster. Not since the Duracell joke. Not since his music became everyone's playground except his own. He was tired. Not the kind sleep fixes. The kind that comes from holding in too much for too long. Across from him, Miss Essie moved slowly but surely. She poured coffee into her favorite floral mug, the one with a faded phrase on the side. God don't play about me. She stirred it once, then looked at her grandson over the rim. You look like a storm in a still pond, she said softly. Malik blinked. She sat down across from him, her eyes sharp but kind, wrinkles deep, carved by time and wisdom, not weariness. You gonna tell me what's been keeping your hands from those keys, child? Malik looked down, then up again. I finished it, he said. She raised her eyebrows. The piece? He nodded, all 3 movements. The setup. It's done. Essie smiled but didn't speak yet. He continued. I recorded it. Last night, 1 take. It's rough, but it's real. Essie leaned back in her chair and exhaled slow. She wasn't the clapping kind, never had been. When she was proud, she didn't cheer. She passed on tools. She stood up, walked to the pantry, and reached up to the highest shelf. Came down with a black leather case, old, battered, and taped at the handle. She set it gently on the table in front of Malik. Open it. He unlatched it carefully. Inside, a record. Thick vinyl, worn edges, gold handwriting on the label. SC in the hollow keys, live at Lowtown, 64. Malik's mouth opened, but no words came. Essie sat down again, hands folded in front of her. I was 22, she said. Piano behind Joe Booker. He was trumpet. We played 3 sets that night in Macon. Real crowd. Drunk. Loud. Hungry for something that couldn't be bottled. Malik traced the label with his fingers. You recorded this? Baby, we burned that stage down, she said, a smirk curling her lips. Had some man from a label come up after and say he'd never seen black fingers play white chords so clean. Told us he'd be in touch. And, she raised her mug, took a sip. Week later, he called to say his boss said we didn't look like our sound. Said Joe's skin didn't sell. Said maybe if we wore wigs and played gospel. Malik's jaw tightened. Essie shrugged. They stole our sound and buried our name. But they couldn't kill the music. That's what I'm trying to tell you. She pointed a finger at him. You think this the first time a Carter got edited out of the story? Malik shook his head slowly. No, ma'am. Essie smiled. Good. So now what? He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a USB flash drive. I'm taking it back, he said. That afternoon at Eastbrook, Malik didn't walk like a shadow. He moved like a note on a staff, measured, deliberate, heading toward a resolve only he could hear. He stopped by the main office and asked for Principal Langley. She wasn't in. Denise at the front desk offered the usual smile, thin and polite. Malik set the USB on the counter. She'll want to hear this, he said. Trust me. Denise looked surprised but nodded. I'll make sure she gets it. Today, Malik added, not threatening, just clear. He left without waiting for a response. At home that evening, Malik sat at his desk, hoodie unzipped now. Not for comfort, for air. Miss Essie entered holding a yellow envelope. Mail came. Inside was a note on cream-colored stationery. Heard your track. No polish. Just power. If you ever want to record it properly, we'll find a way. Don't stop playing. We need more fire in the keys. F. Holloway Jazz Preservation Collective, Savannah. Chapter Malik reread the note twice, then set it down carefully. Essie stood by the door, arms crossed, like she'd been waiting on this moment since the day he touched his first piano key. Well, she asked. He looked up at her and smiled. Not wide, not forced. Just enough. Then he picked up his notebook and turned to a blank page. Tuesday morning, overcast sky, no wind. The kind of day when the air holds its breath. Waiting. Malik stood at the edge of the parking lot, his hoodie drawn up tight, earbuds in, but no music playing. He was listening to the rhythm of the building, to the quiet shifts in sound and tension. Eastbrook hadn't changed, not on the surface. Stickers still covered the back walls of lockers. Trevor still held court in the hallway, cracking jokes too loud. Ms. Weller still smiled like a mask and pretended her classroom didn't have shadows. But something had shifted. The silence around Malik wasn't mockery anymore. It was uncertainty. Because the video, the real video, had dropped. Sometime after midnight, someone, not Malik, uploaded the full recording of the setup to YouTube. High-quality audio, minimal title, Malik Carter. The setup, live recording. No gimmicks, no captions, just sound. And by morning, 20,000 views. A jazz forum picked it up first. Then a music teacher in Chicago posted it on Twitter with the caption, "One of my 6th graders just sent me this and said, 'This is what our school doesn't get.'" He's right. Then came the comments. Who is this kid? The harmony and movement too is insane. I heard anger, grace, and survival in 3 minutes. That's more honest than most adults. That hoodie has a story. This needs to be on NPR. By second period, the students at Eastbrook knew. They didn't say anything directly to Malik, not yet, but they watched him differently. Some moved out of his way, some stepped closer, but no one laughed. Not even Trevor. Miss Weller pulled him aside after class. Her voice was soft. Too soft. Malik, she paused, adjusting her scarf. I heard the recording. He didn't say anything. She continued, I want you to know that I support your growth. I think you're incredibly talented. And if you ever want to talk about your experience, or did you share it? Malik interrupted. She blinked. Share what? The original performance. The one at the assembly. Did you send it to anyone? Her lips parted, then closed. He nodded. That's what I thought. He turned to walk away. She reached out. Malik, I didn't mean for... He stopped, but didn't turn back. I think you meant for exactly what happened. You just didn't expect the story to change. Then he walked out. During lunch, the music room door creaked open. Malik sat behind the piano again, just like the day after the assembly. But this time, he wasn't alone. 4 students stood near the doorway, silent. Then 2 more. Then 8. Then a teacher. They didn't crowd him. They just listened. He played not the setup, but something new. A variation. A melody folding in on itself and rebuilding again. Like breath. Like healing. When he finished, no one clapped. They just nodded and left the room quiet. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, Malik sat on the floor beside Miss Essie's old record player. The vinyl of Essie and the hollow keys spun gently, scratchy and full of ghosts. She was across the room, peeling sweet potatoes, humming low. I heard the principal called your mama today, she said without looking up. Yeah, Malik replied. Wanted to schedule a meeting. Something about PR and positive press. Essie snorted. Now they care. He nodded. Now they want the hoodie on a brochure. She looked at him. You gonna give it to him? Malik smirked. Only if they let me write the caption. She smiled wide. There he go. Tuesday morning. Cold light through stained windows. A silence in the building that didn't feel like peace. It felt like waiting. Malik walked through the front doors of Eastbrook as usual. Hoodie up, notebook in hand, earbuds dangling without sound. But the stairs that used to burn like fire now hesitated, held breath. The viral video had changed something, but not enough to rewrite what came before. People weren't celebrating him. They were calculating him, trying to decide how close they could get before guilt stuck to their hands. At 9:15, the front office called him over the PA system. Not for detention, not for counseling. Just Malik Carter, please report to the main office. He zipped his hoodie halfway, stood slowly, and walked out of room 214 without looking back. Even Ms. Weller didn't stop him, maybe because this time she couldn't frame the story in her voice anymore. Principal Langley waited in the administrative conference room. The walls were covered in gold-plated awards. Behind her, a flat screen blinked with paused footage of the local news. Malik's name was in the lower third. 12-year-old composer's Anthem of Resistance goes viral. She smiled when he walked in, the kind of smile polished by press training and donor meetings. Please sit, she said. Malik did. No words yet, just a stare. Langley opened a leather folder and slid 2 papers across the table. A release form and a media itinerary. We've been contacted by a few outlets, she said. GPB, a podcast out of New York, even an NPR affiliate. They're calling this a cultural moment. He nodded slowly, still didn't speak. Langley kept going. Naturally, they're interested in your story, but they're also interested in Eastbrook. We see this as an opportunity to highlight our school's support for creative voices, diverse expression, resilience. Stop, Malik said quietly. Langley paused. He looked up at her, eyes steady, voice even. Support? She blinked. Yes, of course, You supported me when they called me Mozart and mocked me, when they made stickers, when they edited videos, when they printed posters with my face and passed them around like flyers. Malik, no, really, he said. Tell me when the support started. Was it before or after my grandmother's living room outdid your auditorium? Langley sat back. A bead of sweat appeared at her temple. He leaned forward now, not angry, just finished. You don't get to rewrite this. Not for your brochure, not for your alumni gala, not because you want to pretend like the system worked. He pulled a flash drive from his hoodie pocket. Here's the audio, he said, sliding it across the table. Uncut, full version. Play it at the next board meeting. Let them hear what y'all tried to shut down. Langley stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. Then she reached for her pen. Malik, perhaps we can schedule a follow-up to... I'm not signing anything, he said. Not until someone else does. She raised an eyebrow. Who? My name? My story? My hoodie? He stood. You'll need all three. That afternoon, back in room 214, Ms. Weller avoided eye contact for the first 10 minutes of class. Then she spoke. Before we begin today's lesson, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Malik Carter. The room froze. Weller continued, hands clasped, tone flat. Malik, I want to commend you for your recent success, and I hope you know, despite any previous misunderstandings, your voice is important here. He looked up from his notebook, met her eyes, and said just two words, prove it. The next morning, a new poster appeared outside the main office. Official school letterhead, clean font. Title, Student Spotlight, Malik Carter, composer, storyteller, truth teller. No fake quotes, no photo with cropped context. Just Malik at the piano, hoodie on, eyes closed, fingers in motion. Below it, a quote. They tried to cut the power, so I rewired the room. Attributed to MC. At home that night, Malik and Miss Essie sat on the stoop outside their apartment. The air smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. She passed him a cup of ginger tea, wrapped in a napkin with hand-stitched initials. You made him listen, she said softly. No, Malik replied. I made him hear. She smiled at that. Same thing, baby. Just depends on who's holding the mic. They sat there in the growing dusk, not triumphant, not loud, just present. The first sign wasn't an explosion. It was a paper cut, an email, from a parent who barely knew Malik, but had watched the viral clip on Facebook late one night and couldn't sleep after. She had a child in another district, a child who loved music, a child who had once been laughed off the stage for playing Chopin in a school talent show. Her message was short, direct, and quietly damning. What did Eastbrook do to protect the student? It landed in the inbox of the school board's public communications director at 6:42 a.m. on a Monday. By noon, 6 more had followed. By Wednesday, 31. Then came the calls. Radio stations, podcast producers, a writer from the Savannah Ledger, a segment coordinator from GPB, Georgia Public Broadcasting, who had heard the setup on YouTube, cried during the second movement, and wanted to run a feature titled, The Boy in the Hoodie Who Played Back. They didn't want to talk to Principal Langley. They didn't care about brochures. They wanted Malik. Langley tried to control the narrative, of course. She released a statement through the school's social media channels. Eastbrook Charter School is proud of our student Malik Carter for his artistic achievement. We continue to promote equity, integrity, and self-expression across our academic programs. But it was too late. The students weren't buying it, and neither were their parents. During that Friday's PTA meeting, the auditorium wasn't filled with cookies and polite claps. It was filled with questions. A Latina mother in the third row raised her hand. I just want to understand, she said, voice steady, why it took a viral video for this school to recognize a child's worth. The room murmured. A man in the back stood up next. My son told me kids were laughing when the piano cut off. And the teacher, Ms. Weller, she just stood there. Why was that okay? Langley stammered. We deeply regret. No, the man interrupted. You regret the attention, not what happened. By Monday, the pressure had cracked the surface. Trevor James was called into the front office twice in one day. His mother, a fixture on the PTA board, wrote a Facebook post calling the backlash mob justice. It was ratioed into oblivion within hours. One comment read, "Your son laughed when another kid was humiliated. Let's not pretend he was the victim." The next day, Trevor was quietly removed from the student ambassador program. His photo came down from the leadership wall by the cafeteria. He didn't come to school for 2 days after that. Then it was Dylan Rush's turn. It started with screenshots. Someone sent in copies of his group chats where he joked about Malik's hoodie smelling like library books and failure, where he took credit for the unplugged keyboard, where he called it the greatest prank of the year. By the end of the week, Dylan was suspended. 3 days out, then 2 weeks of digital conduct probation. His parents threatened legal action. But Eastbrook didn't budge. Not because they grew a conscience, because they smelled liability. Ms. Weller, she was still standing, but her feet weren't steady. During her third period class that Thursday, a student raised their hand, not to answer a question, but to ask one. "Ms. Weller," they said, "why didn't you stop them at the assembly?" She froze. Her hand gripped the dry erase marker so tight the cap cracked. After a pause too long to be comfortable, she replied, "We're not here to relive the past. Let's move forward." But the damage was done. The classroom was no longer hers. The next week, Eastbrook made it official. Ms. Weller would be transferring to a new district-wide arts initiative at a different campus. No farewell party, no staff room speech, just a quiet email sent after hours. She packed her things before lunch. No one helped her carry the box. And Malik, he never spoke about it, not once. But everyone knew. Because on the same day Miss Weller left, a new plaque appeared on the music room door. Malik Carter, Composition Lab. They cut the sound. He rewrote the silence. Not sponsored, not staged. Just there. Permanent. By the following week, Malik Carter had become something Eastbrook never intended. A standard. Not a symbol, not a headline. A measure. The name whispered in every staff meeting when someone said, "We need to be careful." The example teachers referred to when discussing cultural responsiveness. The reference point students used when talking about courage. Not loud, but respectfully. Because now, everything was measured against how they treated him. Trevor returned to school on Wednesday, but something had changed. He didn't strut through the halls anymore. He didn't joke at lockers or toss his football against the gym wall. He kept his head low, sat near the back. Some of the boys who used to crowd around him moved to other lunch tables. One of them, a tall kid named Grant, dropped this line during science class. "Yo, man, you embarrassed all of us. You didn't just laugh, you planned it." Trevor didn't respond. He just looked down at his worksheet and stayed silent. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Now he was the quiet one. Meanwhile, Dylan's suspension was over, but his reputation was not. The rumors didn't stop. If anything, they grew teeth. No one wanted to be seen hanging with him. Teachers called on him less. His spot as team captain of the JV basketball team? Gone. The coach, a no-nonsense Vietnam vet named Mr. Baxter, had only said one sentence. "Captain doesn't mean clown." Dylan tried to argue, claimed he was just being funny, but nobody laughed. The ripple didn't stop with the students. 2 faculty members, one from the music department and one from guidance, requested transfers by the end of the quarter. Unofficially, they said it was because of leadership misalignment. Privately, it was because of Langley, because they saw how she let it happen, how she buried it under PR lines and photo ops, how she didn't step in until the internet forced her hand. And as the structure buckled, Malik did what he always did. He showed up, sat quietly, took notes, played. He didn't gloat, didn't post cryptic captions, didn't throw shade in the hallways. He just moved forward, like the storm had passed through him, and what came out the other side was music, sharper, cleaner, unapologetic. At the next student assembly, something strange happened. Langley took the stage as always. Mic in hand, smile fixed. But when she began her usual speech, something flickered. Maybe it was the empty front row where Trevor and Dylan used to sit. Maybe it was the way students looked at her, not with admiration, but awareness. She cleared her throat and said, "Today we're here to honor resilience, creativity, and student voice." Then she paused. The next line on the teleprompter was probably some pre-approved shout-out to the debate team. But instead, she said, "Before we go further, I'd like to acknowledge one student in particular. A beat. Malik Carter, would you please stand?" He didn't move. At first, but then slowly he rose from his seat halfway back. Not proud, not smug, just grounded. The auditorium broke into applause. Not roaring, but real. Langley smiled, but it looked forced now, because she knew this wasn't her moment, it was his. Later that afternoon, Malik passed by Miss Weller's old room, now repurposed as a student lounge. The walls had been repainted. The piano, once dusty and ignored, now stood at the center like a monument. Above it, in neat lettering, a quote was stenciled on the wall. "Sometimes silence is not weakness, it's strategy." Unknown. He ran his fingers across the keys once, just once, then walked on. At home that evening, Malik handed Miss Essie an envelope. Inside, an invitation. Savannah Youth Arts Festival closing performance. Featured composer Malik Carter. She looked at it long, then at him. "I hope they know what they're in for." He grinned. They will. By the time spring rolled around, the walls of Eastbrook looked the same. But the air inside had changed. Teachers watched what they said more carefully now. Administrators double-checked every announcement. Assemblies were shorter, safer. Student handbooks were updated with long, careful paragraphs about digital ethics, community accountability, and emotional safety. But you couldn't put what really changed into a bullet point, because the fall didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly, the same way Malik had walked the halls all year. One afternoon in April, Trevor sat alone in the lunchroom. No team around him, no earbuds in, just him and a plastic tray he hadn't touched. Across the room, he watched Malik at the far table. Hoodie up, head down, notebook out. Same as always. But this time, Malik wasn't alone. Abigail sat next to him, flipping through sheet music. Two other students leaned in, nodding, listening. They weren't pretending to be his friends. They weren't clout chasing. They were building with him. And for the first time, Trevor realized something. He was forgettable. But Malik had become essential. That same week, Dylan's mother filed a formal complaint with the district. She claimed her son had been socially ostracized without procedural fairness. The district issued a generic response, then added a new clause to the code of conduct about digital harassment. But the damage was done. Dylan's dad stopped showing up at booster meetings. Dylan himself was barely seen in hallways anymore. When he did show up, he kept his hoodie up, not for fashion, for hiding. Principal Langley, though still technically in charge, was no longer the voice of the school. Parents had begun organizing an equity and student advocacy council without her. Every flyer went out through a private mailing list. Every meeting was held off campus. Langley wasn't invited to speak at the spring fundraiser. Instead, a video of Malik's assembly performance, his real one, was played at the event, followed by a moment of silence. For who, everyone knew. For the moment, the school chose silence instead of standing up. One Friday morning, Malik was called into the office again, but this time, not by Langley. By Mrs. Fields, the district's new director of arts and student engagement. She wore no pearls, no high heels, just a denim blazer and a warm smile. "I've been hearing a lot about you," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. "And I'd like to propose something." Malik opened the folder. Inside, a scholarship application, a mentorship program, a summer spot at the Miles Academy for young composers. Full ride, all expenses, no essays required. "Your name says enough," she said. Malik didn't answer. He just closed the folder carefully and said, Thank you. Later that day, Malik walked through the school like he always had. Same hallway, same hoodie. But now, people stepped out of his way. Not from fear, from respect. And as he passed the old music room, he paused. Inside, a younger student, fifth grade maybe, sat at the piano bench trying to plunk out something original. The notes were messy, the rhythm off. But the effort, it was real. Malik stepped in, knelt beside the bench, and whispered, "Start in a minor. It'll fit your voice better." The kid looked up, eyes wide. "You play here?" he asked. Malik smiled, "Sometimes," then walked out. At home that evening, the house was quiet except for the gentle clink of Miss Essie's spoon against her teacup. She looked at Malik over the rim of her mug. Still wearing that hoodie? He glanced down, tugged it tighter. "I thought about taking it off," he admitted, "but I remembered." She raised an eyebrow. "It's not just for hiding," he said. "It's for holding." Essie smiled. "The weight, the history, the silence." "Hold it all, baby," she said, "but don't let it hold you." He nodded once, and for the first time in months, he unzipped the hoodie, not to discard it, but to breathe freely inside it. Then he sat at the keyboard and began something new. They never expected him to speak. They were ready for a performance, something sweet, brief, poetic, maybe even musical. Something they could record, quote, and sprinkle into a brochure about resilient youth. Something safe. But when Malik Carter stepped on stage that May morning at the District Student Leadership Roundtable, it was clear he wasn't here to make anybody comfortable. He didn't bring a piano. He brought his hoodie, gray, same as ever, zipped high, hands tucked in the front pocket like he was holding something heavy and precious. The gym-turned auditorium was packed. School board members in suits, teachers who wore diversity pins but not accountability, students from other schools, some curious, some skeptical. And in the back row, slouched and silent, sat Principal Langley. She didn't smile. Malik didn't look at her. He stepped up to the mic, adjusted it once, then spoke. "I didn't ask to be here." The first sentence landed like a flat note in a room expecting jazz. "I didn't fill out a form. I didn't audition. I didn't volunteer to be a lesson. I became one because the people in charge decided that a hoodie on a quiet black boy meant story." He scanned the room, not seeking approval, just making sure they were awake. But they didn't like the story once I started writing it myself. Silence, but a heavy kind. Respectful, uncertain, curious. He told them everything, from the piano that lost power at the assembly, to the fake awards stuffed in his locker, to the stickers, the silence, and the counselor who said, "Maybe next time just say no." "What they did to me wasn't just a mistake," Malik said. "It was a system on autopilot." He paused. "Let that sit, and I'm not the only one it flies over." A few students in the audience nodded, quietly, firmly. Malik continued, "You say you want student voice, but what you really want is student compliance. You want kids who speak when spoken to, who raise their hand only when praised. But what do you do with a kid who writes music instead of essays? Who wears a hoodie instead of a button-down? Who doesn't want to be your poster child, just left alone to play?" The moderator, a man in his 50s with a nervous smile, tried to lean toward the mic to steer things back. Malik raised one hand, didn't yell, just said, "Let me finish my sentence, please." It wasn't loud, but it shut the room down better than any speech had in years. He turned slightly now, toward the rows of teachers and administrators. "If you're uncomfortable, good. If you're wondering how this happened at your school, start with the moments you looked away. When you saw someone being mocked and told yourself, 'Kids will be kids.' When you saw a black boy playing piano and thought it was unexpected instead of normal." He didn't flinch, not once. "Stop calling it inspiration when what you really mean is survival. I don't want your applause. I want your action. I want the next kid who wears a hoodie and plays something brilliant not to be asked where he downloaded it from. I want you to stop pretending you're shocked every time a child outgrows your low expectations." Then he paused, took a breath, and delivered the line no one forgot. "I am not here for your redemption arc. I am here to remind you, silence is never neutral. It always protects someone." There was no applause yet, just stillness. Somewhere in the back, someone finally whispered, "Damn." When he stepped down from the stage, the moderator didn't return right away because nobody was ready to talk. Not yet, because they had just been taught something. Not by a keynote speaker, not by a consultant, by a boy in a hoodie. Malik didn't wait for the applause. He didn't look for it either. He stepped down from the stage like he had just put a folder back on the shelf. No ego, no grandstanding. Just facts. Just what needed saying. But behind him, something shifted. At first, the room stayed still. No clapping, no whispers, not even phones out. Just the kind of silence that happens when people finally realize they've been asleep too long. Then, quietly from the back, a woman stood up. She wore a blue skirt suit, clipboard in hand, a school district badge on her chest. She didn't clap. She just said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I've been in education for 19 years. That was the most honest thing I've ever heard from a student. Thank you, Malik." That opened the flood. People began standing, not clapping, not cheering, standing. Some had tears in their eyes. Others just looked stunned. Not because Malik had said something new, but because he'd said what everyone had known and ignored. After the session, Malik was supposed to attend a breakout roundtable with other students. He skipped it. He didn't need to talk more. He'd already said everything he needed. As he stepped out the side exit, he found Miss Essie sitting on a bench under a crabapple tree. "Whole building shaking," she said with a grin. "Did you leave anything standing?" Malik chuckled. "Just enough." She stood, handed him a granola bar and a cold bottle of peach tea. "You good?" He nodded, but then paused. "I thought I'd feel, I don't know, lighter." "You feel heavy?" she asked. "Not heavy," he said, "just aware. Like now that I've said it all out loud, I can't ignore any of it either." Essie nodded, the way only elders do when they see you growing in real time. "That's not weight, baby," she said. "That's responsibility. It don't go away, but you learn how to carry it." The next few days, Malik went back to routine. School, homework, music room. But now people saw him differently. Some students still didn't say much, but they nodded when they passed him in the hallway. A few fist bumps, a few awkward heys. Even the security guard by the main entrance said, "Respect, young man," without explaining why. Malik didn't ask. He just nodded back. Because he understood something now. He didn't have to be liked to be heard. And being heard, that was enough. But not everyone was comfortable. Eminas. Langley sent a school-wide email titled, "Continuing the Conversation. Building Equity Through Student Voice." It included a 3-sentence summary of Malik's speech and a photo of the event, cropped to exclude her own presence. The subject line tried to frame it as progress, but the students knew, and so did the teachers who had stayed silent when it mattered. One math teacher emailed Malik privately, "I should have said something that day. I didn't. You taught me more in 12 minutes than I've learned in 12 years of staff development. Thank you." Malik didn't reply. He didn't need to. By the end of the week, a guidance counselor invited Malik to help co-lead a restorative student circle. He declined. Instead, he asked if they'd be willing to host an open mic night in the gym. No agenda, no evaluation, just sound, stories, expression, no filters. The counselor agreed. The event took place 2 weeks later. Students signed up. Some rapped, some read poetry. One girl read a journal entry about being biracial and feeling like she didn't belong on either side of the cafeteria. Someone played the cello. No one was judged. No one was filmed. And when it was Malik's turn, he didn't play the piano. He didn't give a speech. He just stepped up to the mic, hoodie on, and said, "Sometimes it's not about proving them wrong. It's about reminding yourself you were never broken." Then he stepped down, and the room stayed quiet, not out of awkwardness, out of respect. They didn't give him a medal, no polished plaque, no banner across the stage, just a name, spoken clearly. First. At Eastbrook's end-of-year assembly, the same auditorium where the sound had once been cut mid-note, the same stage where they'd tried to turn him into a glitch, Malik Carter now stood center. This time, on his own terms. Principal Langley stood at the podium. Her words were chosen like stones across a river, meant to look smooth, but each step was uncertain. We begin today by honoring a student whose voice, through music, through courage, through truth, has reshaped how we see one another. She glanced down at the printed paper, then looked up. "Malik Carter, would you please come forward?" The room was still. Then, applause. A slow build, not thunderous, not performative. Real, earned, grounded. He stood, not with a grin, not with a strut. Just presence. He wore the same hoodie, gray, soft from wear, washed but worn at the sleeves. He walked with his notebook tucked under one arm, chin high, shoulders loose, no longer heavy, just certain. When he reached the stage, Langley extended a certificate, some excellence in arts and advocacy commendation. He took it, folded it carefully once, then leaned toward the mic, paused and said, "I wrote a lot of music this year, but what I learned is, you don't need sound to speak." He glanced out at the crowd, students, staff, even Ms. Weller standing quietly near the exit. Sometimes silence is survival, and sometimes it's a warning. Then he stepped down. No speech, just enough. Back at his seat, Malik let the rest of the assembly roll past him. Awards, claps, lame jokes from the student council president. But something had changed in the way it all sounded to him now, like he was outside the frame they used to crop him into. And for once, he was okay with that. After the ceremony, a younger student, a fifth grader named Zion, ran up to him in the hallway. Skinny, bright-eyed, hoodie 3 sizes too big. "Yo," he said, "I heard your thing online. Like, the real one. My sister played it for me. You made the piano sound like a fight and a prayer at the same time." Malik blinked and then laughed. "A fight and a prayer, huh?" Zion nodded hard. "I play too. Kinda. Not like that, but maybe one day." Malik unzipped his backpack, pulled out a folded copy of his handwritten notes from the setup. "Start with minor chords," he said. "Don't try to sound good. Try to sound honest." Zion took the paper like it was gold. It might as well have been. That night back at the apartment, Miss Essie was waiting with dinner on the stove and a quiet fire in her eyes. "Make 'em clap today?" she asked without turning from the pot. "Some did," Malik said, kicking off his shoes. "Some just listened." Essie stirred the collard greens, nodded. "That's better anyway." After dinner, they sat out on the balcony. The city hummed low. The sky was pink and bruised at the edges. Malik leaned back in the chair, the certificate still folded in his pocket. Essie sipped her tea. "You proud?" she asked. Malik thought a second, then said, "Yeah, but not 'cause they clapped. 'Cause I didn't change my song." She smiled at that. Real soft, real wide. That's the part they gon' remember. The next morning, a new email landed in his inbox. Subject line, "We heard you. Let's build something together." It was from a nonprofit based in Atlanta. They wanted to fund a youth program using Malik's model, arts-based truth-telling, mentorship through music, voice as leadership, no strings, just belief. Malik forwarded it to Essie without a word. She wrote back with one line, "Told you that song wasn't just yours." The last Friday of the school year came in quiet. No bells, no fanfare, just the sun rising slowly over the rooftops of Eastbrook, warming the sidewalks where for months Malik Carter had walked alone, hoodie up, backpack low, silence his shield. But this morning, the walk felt different, not because people noticed him now, because he no longer needed them to. He passed the bus stop on 7th Street, where last fall 2 kids had filmed him playing keys in the courtyard, only to slap auto-tune over it and post it to TikTok as a joke. Those same 2 kids were there again, but this time, when they saw him, they didn't reach for their phones. They just nodded. Malik nodded back. No smile, no stare, just enough to say, "I remember, but I'm not carrying you with me anymore." The front doors of Eastbrook were wide open. Students drifted in like leaves in a lazy breeze. Seniors high-fived. 6th graders chased each other around lockers. The walls were still the same dull cream, the smell of floor polish still too strong, and the announcements still buzzed over the intercom like they were being read underwater. But inside all that sameness, Malik moved different. He didn't shrink, didn't float. He walked. Like gravity was something he understood now, not just in science class, but in life. In homeroom, Ms. Bennett, one of the few teachers who had quietly slipped him encouragement throughout the year, handed out summer intention worksheets. Most kids groaned. Some scribbled jokes. Malik read the prompt carefully. "What will you carry forward from this year?" He stared at the blank space for a while, then wrote, "The hoodie, but not the weight." 2nd period, then 3rd. Lunch came and went. Nobody tried him. Nobody needed to. The game had changed. Not because he'd won a fight, because he'd outgrown it. At the final bell, Malik didn't rush out. He returned to the music room, room 214. Empty now, echoing. The lights were off, but the keys still worked. He sat one last time at the school's old upright piano, ran his fingers lightly across the C chord, then played a slow, short phrase. Not dramatic, not even finished. Just a note that hung in the air and didn't ask for anything. He closed the lid, took a deep breath, and stood. As he stepped out into the hallway, he nearly ran into Abigail. She was holding a yearbook, eyes bright, unsure. "Hey," she said. "Hey. I know you're not really into this stuff," she said, lifting the yearbook, "but would you sign mine?" Malik hesitated, then took it, turned to a blank page in the back. No space next to his photo. He wasn't even pictured in the student life section. He wrote, "We're not defined by how they printed us. We're defined by how we show up anyway." MC, he handed it back. She read it, didn't say anything, just gave a quiet smile and walked off. Outside, the sun had started to dip. Not quite evening, not quite done. Malik walked alone down Eastbrook Boulevard, the school behind him. But the hoodie, still on, still his, still standing. As he turned the corner onto his block, something caught his eye. A new mural painted on the side of the rec center. Spray paint, clean lines, powerful colors. It showed a boy at a piano, hoodie up, head down, hands in motion. Behind him, silhouettes stood watching, not laughing, listening. Underneath, in bold black letters, "Truth has its own soundtrack." No signature, no tag, just a statement. Malik stopped, stared, then nodded to himself, because he didn't need to know who painted it. The city was speaking now, and this time, it was in key. It had been less than a week since the school let out, but the air already felt different. Not just warmer, wider, like the world had stretched open for Malik Carter, piece by piece, note by note. Friday evening found him sitting on the stoop outside the apartment again, just like hundreds of other nights. Hoodie on, notebook in lap. But this time the page wasn't blank. He was writing something new, something without a title, without rules. Miss Essie pushed the door open behind him, carrying 2 glasses of sweet tea. No lemon this time, just cold, sugary calm. She passed one to him and sat down beside him, groaning as she eased onto the concrete. "You still got that same look," she said after a moment. "What look?" "The one like your head's 2 verses ahead of your hands." Malik grinned. "Might be." She sipped her tea and looked out at the city like it was a song she'd heard before, but couldn't stop humming. "You know," she said, "most kids your age don't leave behind a legacy before they finish 8th grade." Malik didn't answer right away. He watched a boy skate past on the sidewalk, a backpack bouncing against his shoulders. He was wearing a hoodie too, navy blue, sleeves too long. Malik watched him disappear down the block before saying, "I didn't want a legacy. I just wanted to finish my song." Essie turned and looked at him, her smile softening. "And that, baby," she said, "is exactly why they'll remember you." The next morning, Malik packed his duffel bag, hoodies, notebook, USB drive, one clean pair of sneakers, just in case the festival crowd turned out fancier than expected. The Savannah Youth Arts Festival was known across the state, part celebration, part showcase, part proving ground for young musicians. But Malik wasn't nervous. He wasn't even excited. He was ready. Miss Essie hugged him at the train station like she wasn't sure if she'd see him in 2 days or 2 decades. "You sure you got everything?" she asked, straightening his collar. "I got what matters," he said, patting his hoodie pocket. The train pulled in, brakes hissing like a sigh. She kissed his forehead once. Hard. "Don't let them turn you into something you ain't," she whispered. Malik stepped onto the train, and the door closed behind him. The ride to Savannah was smooth, the windows flashing past pine trees and low country fields. Malik sat by himself, headphones in, not for music, but for quiet. He watched the world blur and thought about that mural again, the one by the rec center, the painted boy at the piano, the silhouettes behind him, not laughing, not mocking, just listening. That mural wasn't a tribute, it was a shift, proof that the city was starting to hear what it had once tried to mute. And somehow that felt bigger than any performance ever could. When the train arrived, a volunteer from the festival met him at the platform. She was maybe 17, with round glasses and a clipboard covered in stickers. "You're Malik?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Yeah." "I've been waiting to meet you," she said. "We've been blasting your track in the warm-up hall all week." One of the kids cried during rehearsal. Malik raised an eyebrow. She laughed. In a good way. They said it sounded like somebody telling the truth without yelling. He blinked, didn't know what to say to that. So he just nodded. The venue was beautiful, old wood beams, soft stage lights, rows of velvet chairs that still smelled like polish and sweat and ghosts. The piano was grand, glossy black, clean. When Malik sat behind it for rehearsal, he didn't test it with scales or warm-ups. He just laid his fingers down and let them speak. Movement 1. Movement 2. Then the part no one had heard yet. Movement 4. He'd written it late one night after school let out. No name, just feeling. A slow build, a release. A final chord that didn't resolve neatly, because life didn't either. He finished, looked up. The sound guy stood in the back of the room, mouth slightly open. "You wrote that?" he asked. Malik nodded once. "That last part, what do you call it?" Malik thought, then smiled. "The walk." They say music ends in silence. But for Malik Carter, silence was never the end. It was the canvas. And that night, under the golden lights of the Savannah Youth Arts Festival, he painted in full color. The crowd hushed as his name was called. He didn't walk out with a swagger. He didn't smile wide for the cameras. He just moved, shoulders relaxed, hoodie zipped halfway, palms flat at his sides. Every step across the stage felt like stitching something shut, a wound left open too long. The grand piano waited in the center, glossy black, perfectly tuned, a stark contrast to the beat-up upright back at Eastbrook. But Malik didn't treat it any different. He sat, rolled his shoulders once, placed his hands gently on the keys, and began. The first movement was soft, subtle, measured. It mimicked the day of the assembly, the stillness before the crowd, the breath he took before the lights went out. Then came a slight pause, an audible glitch in rhythm, like a stutter. But it wasn't an accident. It was a memory. And anyone who had seen the video, the real one, knew exactly what it referenced. The room shifted. People leaned in. They were hearing a testimony, not a performance. Movement 2, the silence, built on minor chords and pauses that stretched just long enough to make you ache. A solo cello joined him, soft as a whisper. It carried the weight of hallways walked alone, of teachers who looked away, of laughter behind locked screens. But then, movement. 3, the shift. He brought the left hand in, strong. The tempo picked up. Rhythm, like the rush of footsteps in a hallway where you're no longer invisible. Notes tumbled out, bold, unapologetic. And layered beneath them, a hint of gospel, a nod to the living room nights with Miss Essie humming hymns while he practiced. It wasn't pretty. It was real. Then came the movement they didn't expect. Movement 4, the walk, a build soft as dawn, a high melody floated over steady, pulsing bass. Hope, deliberate and earned, not loud, not desperate, just forward. At one point he lifted his hands entirely, letting the final chord ring, letting the room breathe in what he was leaving behind. Not pain, not even pride, just presence. The applause didn't explode. It grew, a wave, a standing ovation, not for the flash or flare, but for truth. Malik stood, bowed once, and walked off without looking back. Backstage, people stopped him with handshakes, with gratitude, with tears. An older jazz musician placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You just reminded a room full of grown folk why we started playing in the first place." A 13-year-old violinist asked if she could sample his composition in her next project. Malik smiled, but said little, because he knew. The music had already said everything. 2 days later, back home, Malik stood on the sidewalk in front of the rec center. Same mural, same boy at the piano. But something new had been added since he left. Another figure, a smaller child, hoodie up, headphones on, looking up at the first boy with wide eyes. Beneath it, someone had tagged in clean white script, "Let them hear you, even if you play alone." Malik stared at it for a long time, then pulled out a Sharpie from his backpack, wrote 3 letters under the quote, MC, not for credit, just to mark that he'd been there, that he saw what they saw now. That night, on the balcony with Miss Essie, he replayed the recording of the performance. The piano's last chord faded out into static and street noise. "You did it, baby," she said. Malik looked out over the street. "No," he said, then smiled. "We did." So what happens after the final note fades? What happens when the boy in the hoodie, the one they laughed at, the one they tried to mute, walks off the stage not with applause echoing behind him, but with a deeper silence, a silence that feels different now, a silence that respects? Because by the time Malik Carter played his final chord, the story wasn't about him anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been overlooked, everyone who'd been told to sit still, smile small, stay quiet, everyone who'd been told their pain wasn't palatable enough to be poetry, their hoodie wasn't clean enough to be considered promise. Their voice wasn't soft enough to be heard without fear. But Malik, he didn't raise his fist. He raised his sound. And the beauty is, he didn't just fight for a seat at the table. He built a new one. Now other kids who wear hoodies, who walk slow, who don't shout to be noticed, they're pulling up chairs. They're writing their own scores, telling their own truths. And somewhere in a classroom like Eastbrook, in a hallway like yours, there's another quiet genius with calloused fingertips and a melody aching to be heard. So the question is, will you listen next time before the applause starts? It was about a system that failed to hear him until he made silence impossible. It was about what happens when someone stops asking for permission to be seen and just starts showing up anyway. If Malik's story made you feel something, don't let it stop here. Share this video. There's a kid somewhere who needs to know they're not the only one fighting through the noise. Subscribe to Silent Power Stories, because we don't just tell stories to entertain. We tell them to remember, to confront, to empower. Turn on notifications so you never miss a moment when silence gets broken the right way. Because here at Silent Power Stories, we believe this: the most dangerous kid in the room isn't the one yelling. It's the one who walks in quiet, sits down, and rewrites everything in a hoodie.